He spent 4 decades proving that aging doesn't have to mean you fall apart.
5 months after Liz Frank injury, my son was spinning on that foot and won the California State Discus Championship.
He's not only a clinical pharmacist, board-certified clinical nutritionist, best-selling author of Cracking the Metabolic Code, the founder of the Metabolic Code, the godfather of peptides, Dr. James LaValle.
What is the biggest thing that you struggle with to help people cross the bridge to taking a personal interest in their health?
Today's guest, has actually spent 4 decades proving that aging doesn't have to mean you have to, fall apart. He's not only a clinical pharmacist, board certified clinical nutritionist, best-selling author of Cracking the Metabolic Code, the founder of the Metabolic Code, and what I'm going to label him as the godfather of peptides, to say the least. It's Dr. James LaValle. Now,
How you
Dr.
doing?
LaValle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Yeah, feeling great.
Awesome. I will say, our previous conversations, you're probably like, I can't wait. I hope I'm half as fit and active as you are at your age. So it's amazing
Well,
to see, man. It really makes me rethink. Like, you're actually the same age as my dad, and your guys are like on the polar opposite sides of it. So
well, I'd be a terrible avatar for the American Academy of Anti-Aging if I did not get up on stage and look like, hey, this guy's doing it right. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. LaValle, the whole point of this podcast is to pay down what we call your wisdom tax. And you're probably asking, what the heck that is, right? Well, your wisdom tax is really, going back in time, lessons that you've learned through your failures and, just business lessons, life lessons, and everything in between, and what things you could tell your previous self where you could really not only save yourself time, but gain that wisdom as well. So one of the first things I really wanted to ask you is, when you start out, what were some mentors that really, really helped you excel?
Yeah, probably my biggest mentors early on, Dr. Alexander Wood or Sandy Wood. He started the Ontario College of Naturopathic Medicine, was accomplished as a chiropractor, had a degree in psychology, certified in acupuncture, but he was brilliant at biochemistry, and he really shaped a lot of what I do today. I think I take a lot of his systematic approach. And then the other one was Dr. David Poland, who was actually a doctor of chiropractic, but he also had a lab degree in laboratory science. Mm-hmm. And he was just really in front of the curve in terms of how do we deal with people that are in trouble. And I was fortunate enough to, kind of experience both of them. And I feel like I stand on their shoulders. And I'm hoping that what I've done over the last 40 years is allow people to stand on my shoulders.
Absolutely. 40 years. So let's touch on that. One of the things when I first spoke to you, one of the things that you'd mentioned is, I asked you about the metabolic code. And, one thing that really stood out to me was you said, this isn't just my work. It's a collective of work from everybody else as well. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, well, I think once again, when you're standing on other folks' shoulders, it influences who you are and where you're going. And, I had, with the metabolic code, I started lecturing on it in the 90s, looking at your body as a systems of systems, particularly influenced by, the German philosophy of the homotoxicology, that, your body, as your chemistry is getting, disrupted by whatever, right? Environmental burden, stress, nutrient issues, whatever, right? That it creates this distillation down to cellular defects, right? Like you then start to have problems with the mitochondria and how it's performing, how receptors are functioning. And so, and then, look, I read the literature, I'll, listen to folks and go, does this make sense or not? Does it apply in a logical way? Because I was pretty passionate about making sure that what I did was systematic, that it made sense, and that it created proven results. I mean, I think all that's the part that's important in the end. Doesn't matter how much I know, really doesn't. What matters is, the people sitting in front of us at our clinics, and when I teach, healthcare providers, are they getting better? They feel better. They look better. Do they have changes in their labs? That's what matters. Nothing else matters.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did you, and I know you told me a story, how did you get into healthcare? Like, what was one of the first few things that happened in your life that made you say, okay, this is the field that I want to go after, and this is what I want to do with my life?
Yeah, on a personal note, was bodybuilding, was, qualified for a national competition. But at the same time, I was getting rashes and blood sugar disturbances. Things just weren't adding up. I went to actually Dr. Poland, and Dr. Wood, and they put me on a program. This is back in the early 80s. And I'm going through pharmacy school. My pharmacy school was highly dedicated to, teaching pharmacognosy still, plant medicine, and, organic medicinal chemistry, understanding how receptors actually work. And I just did the program and I felt really good. And then when I first got out, what really influenced me was, I was working behind the counter, I was, big, all muscle. They put me in a very rough neighborhood, thinking nobody's going to steal from me, right? Because I looked pretty intimidating. But I had a lady come up to me about 5 minutes to closing. She was a person with diabetes. She had a Medicaid card, went shopping because it was a Kroger store, actually. She came back. I looked in her cart and I said, is there any way I could show you a few things that would help you? So I took her around the store, which I really wasn't supposed to do, but I didn't realize that. And literally, she made recommendations, and people from a very low-income community were coming in asking me questions about, hey, how do I shop to help my health? What that generated was, developing a program where we were screening hundreds of people. We found more new diabetics, sold more glucometers, tagged foods throughout the Kroger store. I literally went in and hand tagged hundreds of foods for people for heart health and diabetes, and had people come in, get their blood sugars checked, worked with the Jewish Hospital Cholesterol Center, which was like nationally known for cholesterol research, and developed the Kroger's Guide to Heart Healthy Shopping, right? And that turned into a national program where it literally influenced millions of people. And what I really learned from that was, it doesn't matter who's sitting in front of you. Like that woman, Medicaid, low income, but what mattered was I served her. And, you just never know what serving someone and helping them, what that can lead to. And so that's kind of the key philosophy I've taken from then on, is just being very oriented at paying attention to that person that's, it's either sitting in front of me or that I'm lecturing to, is creating 110% effort, focus, and drive to, help complete that task. Right. And that really is what triggered me moving out of just, kind of conventional pharmacy or drug therapy, and really driving straight towards kind of more of an integrative thought. And that's what led to the 26 books and writing 5 databases and, all the things, Clinician of the Year for integrative medicine. I mean, all that stuff, I think, is just driven out of passion, man. It's that simple.
Absolutely. You probably, and I would probably go out, and say that you had more of an impact at a Kroger store for any of those people than they probably had all their entire life from any other doctors, to say the least. Would you probably agree with that?
I just am glad that I could make a change. It's that simple.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. LaValle, what are your thoughts on traditional medicine and, how the typical system is for someone to go in if they're feeling any sort of way to see a doctor, basically, traditional medicine as a whole, and then how that's changing with regenerative health?
First of all, I taught at medical school. I get the value of medical providers, especially even in traditional training, because the bottom line is because we have a pretty sick society, they got to identify big problems that are going on in individuals. And sometimes you got to create a Band-Aid, you got to give a drug, do a therapy that they need, because maybe they're not willing to change their lifestyle, the patient. I think the new evolution is that more and more people have woken up to, I need to change what I'm doing. I'm looking for help. And the new model of kind of regenerative, integrative, functional, whatever you want to call it, I just call it good medicine, is that we create a more full thought of what are all the tools that you can deploy to help somebody, not just to manage their disease, but to manage them either staying well or becoming well or reducing the progression of the condition that they've got. And so that's where I see the opportunity is is this growth in understanding the value of all these other modalities.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. LaValle, you had told me a story about, your son at a very young age to
Yeah.
say the least, and something I want you to share with the audience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's how I kind of got into really being interested in peptides. I mean, I had been, started creating education on it, was really hip to peptides. I mean, look, insulin was the first peptide. It's over 100 years ago, right? I mean, it's not like peptides were new, but my son, who was a, two-sport all-state athlete in California, ended up with an injury called a Liz Franck injury, which is a pretty debilitating injury on the foot that typically returned to play is 18 months. Second week of the playoffs in football, he gets that injury. And that weekend when he had that injury, started using peptides specifically on that injury. And it was interesting because when we went to do the MRIs, it took 5 different scans to find where the tear was. And I actually had to contact my former business partner, who was kind of a world leading expert in MRIs. He's taught thousands and thousands of healthcare providers and written textbooks on it. He was in the outback in Australia. I was like, Steve, it's Dr. Steve Pomerantz. I was like, Steve, I need you to help me find this tear because it's not helping. And he literally showed me, hey, look, we need to position it this way, take the picture this way. Well, we found it. And then I went to a brilliant surgeon who added peptides and stem cells that he collected from Christian, because Christian was like 17 at the time. Added him into the site. And with Liz Franck, it's called sausage foot. Your foot just blows up like after the surgery, right? It's just bad. He only had a little bit of bruising, no swelling. Most importantly, 5 months after that injury, he was spinning on that foot. I mean, putting weight leverage on that foot, and won the California State Discus Championship, which arguably, California is probably the toughest track and field state in the country, right? And that showed me, oh my God, the peptides are a valuable and transformational aspect to what we can do for people. And so that was a big shaping moment for me. And naturally, chair of the International Peptide Society. I've written a couple books on it now. But the reality is, and I've got lots of other cases, even more dramatic to that we've seen, that is just amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, actually, let's talk about peptides. So what are a few, pointers that you could give somebody, one of the listeners that they're a little skeptical on peptides. They're not sure if they should try them or not. What are some, basic pointers that you could give them?
Well, first of all, peptides have been around, like I said, for 100 years. So peptides have value. I would say where I would be skeptical is watch just kind of like the influencer peptide market, the research only peptides where, you're kind of relying on yourself to figure out what's the right thing to do. And really, so the first step is A, be careful. B, realize that they could help you in an incredible way, because basically peptides are small signaling molecules that your body makes. Your body's making thousands of peptides to help you stay in balance. Your system works as a system of systems, trying to keep everything in balance. That's how you're going to age the most gracefully, not overpowering any one system, but keeping all of the networks in harmony, right? And so, don't be afraid of peptides from the standpoint of, gee, are they valid or not? There are peptides, like I said, when they're researched, they could be kind of edgy and maybe only used in a rat model or maybe in a test tube. And, you'd like to find more researched peptides. And obviously, for human use from compounding pharmacies, or look, just to be honest, or in the case of, say, Lilly or Novo, who've been making things like Ozempic and Mounjaro. I mean, these are medications that have got good science behind them. Now, what's the difference? The difference is don't just lean into a peptide. One thing, if you've got an injury and you're thinking about BPC 157, or hey, I'm 60 years old, I want to help my growth hormone, and you're using sermorelin, it's really trying to work with a provider, get peptides that you can rely on through compounding pharmacy that are for human use, so that you can get the benefits of them. And then, of course, getting good guidance, because what I find is a lot of times people end up there and, they're injecting like 12 peptides 3 times a day. And that's not the goal.
Yeah.
Usually means that you probably haven't done some other things in your life that you need to do, like changing diet, thinking of stress, what's your circadian rhythm, is your gut out of balance, right? There's all these other aspects that I think allow peptides to flourish. Like they work that much better.
Absolutely. A few questions. So, what are some recommendations? Would you recommend someone go get their blood work done first, see where they're at? Obviously, you created the metabolic code, and after that, what's like one or maybe even two peptides if someone wants to get into trying peptides that you recommend they
Sure.
look into first?
Yeah, I think like if you have an injury or something like that, you could probably think of a peptide that you can
Yeah.
do like BPC 157 or something along that line. Hair, topical, copper, GHKC use a peptide that really helps hair, as well as collagen synthesis. So people will microneedle GHKCU into their face and maybe do PRF to help create collagen naturally. So I think that there's some things like that where, hey, you don't need to do a blood test, but you really should. If you're talking about working on your chemistry, you need to think about, okay, I should get a blood test. You should understand where you're at, and I think that's incredible. It's incredibly important to figure out where are your metabolic roadblocks. Like where are you the most out of balance? Because a lot of times, if you fix the things that are the most out of balance, a lot of the downstream things that are going on in you will start to correct themselves. So people won't necessarily say, "Wow, I didn't realize that I flattened my cortisol curve. I'm not appropriate with my circadian cortisol release anymore, and that's what it's causing me to crave carbs and sugars all the time." Right? So it's like understanding that full thought of, well, what's going on inside of you. A couple peptides that I think are important. I mean, I'm big on sermorelin, or basically the growth hormone secretagogues, because as people get under stress, they shut down their growth hormone releasing hormone. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means you're going to become catabolic. You're not going to hold on to your muscle as you're aging. And muscle is the currency of longevity. Muscle is the currency of performance health. And I don't mean performance like, hey, I can lift more. If that's your goal, great. It's about how am I getting through my day? And I think that's super important. Another one that I think is an important one, because a lot of people have kind of meta-inflammatory processes. Metabolic inflammation leads to aging or inflammatory aging. KPV, just three amino acids chained together. A peptide like KPV actually helps to regulate and balance immunologic drive in your gut. And we've all heard about the gut-brain connection or the microbiome and its impact on your global health, whether it's mood, inflammation signaling that may be affecting your joints or your connective tissue. So I think KPV is really interesting. Obviously, BPC 157, I think, is it's strange there's not more human studies on it, but I mean, anecdotally, clinicians, orthopedic surgeons, people that have used it just rave about its benefits. And, personally have seen, clients that they benefit from that. So I think those are some interesting ones. The copper peptide, really good for the hair. A lot of people are familiar with PT 141, an approved peptide that helps with I'd say sexual desire, right? So it's not working on things like erectile dysfunction necessarily, but for men and women both, it works more neurologically to work in the higher brain centers to stimulate sexual desire, which, big complaint from a lot of people. And then probably the last one are the GLP-1s. I mean, let's face it, 50% of the population is diabetic or insulin resistant, approaching 50% obesity rate, 70+% overweight. And one of the big reasons for that is we've trained our bodies to kind of not respond anymore to, either low incretin hormone release. And that's going to lead to just storing fat. You're going to store fat and remodel your heart and create all kinds of problems. So those are some of the big ones, I think, that are important and I think out there in front of the market right now.
Absolutely. I want to actually touch on something that you just mentioned. So, what do you have to say to like the skeptics of GLPs? People that say, "Oh, there's not enough studies around it, or the side effects, or all of that stuff as well."
Well, I mean, I teach a certification course on GLP-1s at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. We've taught hundreds and hundreds of patients. And then as the chief science officer for Lifetime, the big fitness organization with 2.5 million members, we've implemented a GLP-1 program. And I think it's all about how you use it. So, if all you're going to do is inject that drug and the weight falls off while you're on it, guess what's going to happen when you get off of it? That weight's coming right back because you didn't do anything else to correct the metabolic imbalances. So we're big fans of titrating your GLP-1 dose to where you're losing 2-3 pounds a week. And at the same time you're doing that, you're adopting a different lifestyle. You are going to exercise in some way. I mean, hopefully you get some weight bearing into it to maintain that lean mass. Because if you just do a GLP-1 on its own, you're going to lose 30-40% of your weight in lean mass. Now, people go, oh, GLP-1s make you lose muscle. No, they don't. It's people don't eat enough, and they're not instructed how much protein to eat. GLP-1s actually help you to retain lean mass. I mean, there's studies that show that they actually are beneficial for that. But when you don't eat enough calories, you're going to lose the same kind of weight if you were on a medical diet where you're at 800 or 1,000 calories a day. You lose the same amount of lean mass. So, I'm bullish on it because I think when people utilize them in that titration way for weight loss, I mean, you're diabetic, that's a whole different scenario, right? You're dosing that related to how your doctor is treating your diabetes. But for weight loss, the less drug you need, the easier it's going to be for you to get off of it because the receptors for those GLP-1s aren't so dependent on those massive doses to get someone to that point. So huge fan of them, not a fan of like the inappropriate use or people buying them on, research sites. And then, I saw a Facebook ad, right? Like, or, somebody's in a Facebook group. They've got a needle pulled up with so much of the ingredient in it. And they're asking the question, is this the right amount? I mean, these aren't dietary supplements, man. These are drugs. You need professional guidance. Exactly. Or animal. It's research only, right? But I mean, the point being is when you go to peptides, they're not a dietary supplement. And you need professional guidance and you want safe products, right? And, so I think those are the areas where I think it's, where it's evolving. I think the current administration has a favorable stance on peptides. I went to the PCAC meetings with FDA and, kind of participated in those and it's a valuable tool. And at the same time, it's one category of tools. Supplements are good. Compounded pharmacy, bioidentical hormones, really important. Stress reduction, like learning mindfulness, important. Moving, important. Choosing foods that are right for you, important. It's all layers into creating a successful program for individuals.
Absolutely. Now, you really touched on a lot the research side. So I think a lot of the listeners, they don't really understand there's what exactly that entails, and then the doctor prescribed side. Can you touch on both of those and your thought process around it for someone wanting to get into peptides?
Yeah, so research only means that they aren't made to the standards, mandatory standards, right, to be considered safe for a human to use them, right? So there's manufacturing steps that have to take place and checks and balances for the quality of the ingredient. And then the end product needs to have stability. It's stable. And there's no adjuvants left from the manufacturing process. And there's just certain steps like filters that need to be used that when it's for human use, you're pulling out anything that could be, potentially deleterious so that it's safe for human consumption. So that's when the doctor gets the script pad out, writes a script for a peptide that's for human use. You have a standard of quality that allows it to occur. And look, anything that's injectable, if you look at law in pharmacy, and I've taught for Professional Compounder Centers of America. When I went through pharmacy school, compounding was mandatory. We had a year of having to make chemicals from different reactions, compound them, have a finished, elegant product. It's all injectables are considered dangerous drugs. That's the term. Once it's injectable, it's a dangerous drug, meaning that when you inject something, you have to worry about what's called immunogenicity. So if you've got compounds in that product because it isn't finished and elegant, chances are you could have a reaction. And so why wouldn't you want to make sure you're doing this correctly?
Absolutely. Can you touch on the other side of it, where there's peptides out there that have doctor oversight?
Yeah, I mean, I think doctor oversight's essential for one, especially if you're using things like GLP-1s that could induce things like pancreatitis. And there's people that with secretagogues, sometimes they inherently can start to create a reaction, like a redness, or you might start to develop a stronger, like a hive reaction. A healthcare provider needs to know about that to tell you what to do, right? So you need that connection to professional service to help you stay, first of all, safe, but secondly, to be able to get the results that you're expecting if you're going to spend your hard-earned money on doing what regenerative and advanced therapies in this kind of integrative world. I mean, I think those are, they're essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, kind of a one-off funny question, funny in a sense. There's this whole thing about Ozempic face going around. Could you touch on Ozempic face and some advice for people on why, a lot of people do get Ozempic face?
Yeah, I mean, it's Ozempic face and Ozempic butt. I mean, it's both, right? I mean, just being real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the two words out there.
Yeah.
And so here's what happens. You go on high doses right away, right? And what happens is, yes, you will turn on your fat burning capacity. You do, because what you do is when you inhibit glucagon, you can make that white fat beige and the beige fat brown and the brown fat burns, right? So that's good. The issue is people don't eat enough, and now their body becomes catabolic. And so they end up, yes, they lose weight, but they lose muscle structure to go with it. So, the glutes melt away. Muscle integrity in the face. All of a sudden you're, sagging, and you're losing your fat pads because it's too rapid. And there's not a proper diet program, because I'm telling you, our program at Lifetime, we virtually get no lean mass loss.
Wow.
None on our program. And that's because we get people to exercise and we get them to eat better. 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight is the target. And when you don't do that, you're going to run that risk of the Ozempic face and the Ozempic butt. And that's why I'm in favor of that titration, because a lot of times you can get by on 1/10 of the dose.
Yeah.
Or 1/5 of the dose. And that's going to mean less of those kind of that harsh run at, really becoming catabolic, and like I said, man, you got to keep that lean muscle as you're aging. It's that simple.
Absolutely. Muscle is, it's the key to everything. What are your thoughts on microdosing? It's starting to become a really, really big thing with GLPs. I wanted to get your thoughts around it.
Here's what I would say is I like the concept of dosing less for people on weight loss. They're not full-blown diabetics. They don't need diabetic doses, right?
Yep.
I like the concept of microdosing. Where I'm not a big fan is when people are doing a little bit every day.
Yeah.
Because there's variations in microdosing now. Oh, I do it twice a week. Oh, I do a little every day. You have to realize that drug, if you're injecting it, different if you've got, say, an oral compound that is releasing just on a daily, right? Where you're only getting maybe 6 or 8 hours of that incretin hormone release, and then you kind of reset. But when you inject, that drug has a half-life of 6 days. So first of all, there's a minimum amount you need to get get a result. So if you're really microdosing daily, you might not really get to the efficacious dose. The second thing is that when you have a half-life that's 6 days, what you're doing when you're taking it multiple times a week is you're kind of building on previous doses with half-lives that are still moving, and you're building it into tissue. And at some point, you're probably going to have too much in your tissue.
Yeah.
And so the way that it was studied was to do it once a week. Now, I've had practitioners report to me they have gone through our course. Oh yeah, I'll break, like if they stagnate versus going up in dose, I'll break it up to twice a week for say 2 or 3 weeks to try to reset them, and then we'll move forward. That's practitioner art. I'm not going to be like, oh my God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? That's the practitioner. It's the clinician saying, hey, look, this is what I do, and this is what I find is effective. And I'm all in for that. At the same time, I realize the half-life is real. It's kind of that thought of, medications are very powerful. And
Yeah.
peptides are incredibly powerful. What I like about peptides, less side effect profile. When you titrate a GLP-1, you're less likely to get constipated. You're less likely to get nauseous. The big, or diarrhea. Those are the biggies most of the time. And you're less likely to develop pancreatitis, and you're less likely to start having eye issues because you're not using nearly as much to accomplish the goal of weight loss. If your goal is I'm a type 2 diabetic and I'm wanting to reduce my mortality or my comorbidity of my heart or my kidneys or my brain, right? Because obviously, dementia is known as type 3 diabetes. And we know that GLP-1s help to bind up neuroinflammatory signaling in the brain. That's a whole different, that's a different population. But for the big, what everybody is moving towards is utilizing these as a way to lose weight, which is a good cause, right? It's a good cause. And I know a lot of people that exercised, they dieted, they're doing boot camps, man, they're doing everything right, and they can't move that needle a pound.
Yeah.
And that's where these are magic because of that, right? Because they restore the metabolic signaling your body should be doing, but isn't doing it. And I always ask this question. Well, because there's a lot of negative, like in fitness, it's like, oh, that's cheating. It's like, well, would you tell somebody that's taking insulin to stop taking insulin, which is a peptide? Yeah. And the answer is obvious. Oh, you wouldn't do that because people would die relatively quickly if they've not taken their insulin. Yeah. The only difference with a GLP-1 is when people don't get that corrected is they die of more chronic illnesses over a period of years. They gain weight, their joints ache, they get cognitive issues, they get kidney issues. And so it puts them in that funnel of leading towards chronic illness because we all know obesity does that, right? Yeah. So that's why I think it's really key and important.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these people, they get scared to put GLPs or peptides into their body, but they don't really understand the importance of even the food and why they are obese, right? That's way worse by far. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. We were, every clinic I've ever been involved with. My wife's a dietitian. She's been, working with me 27 years. And one of our biggest things is teaching people how to eat. And you can't skate that. It'd be great if you could. I'm telling you, I'm Italian. I would love nothing more to have a big bowl of pasta and a couple pieces of pizza every day. I'd love it. I'm telling you, I'd be all over it. Right. But it's not reality. You have to learn. And I'm not saying you're not allowed to have anything, but at the same time, you got to understand what's right for you, what's going to keep you healthy, and what do you want more? Yeah. Like that's probably the biggest thing. What do you want more? Do you want to feel vitality and resiliency? Is that your primary driver? Because once people get a taste of that, they start changing the way they think. They start going, maybe I should be eating better a lot more frequently because I feel so much better, right?
Yep, absolutely. Now, Dr. LaValle, let's talk about the metabolic code. It's something that I've actually become, obsessed with. Can you talk about it in a sense of explaining it to the audience, number one, and then really what are your goals with the metabolic code as well?
Yeah, so the metabolic code was basically my synthesis of, all the years of work. I started lecturing on it 1997. Wow. And it basically, your body operates as a system of systems. It works by networks. So what I did was I broke down all of biochemistry and symptoms and your biometrics and now wearable data and said, what systems, based on how you feel, what your labs say, what your biometrics are, what all this data is flowing into, it all falls into 5 buckets. Now, why did I do it that way? Well, basically, it's easy to make simple things simple. You do one blood test, you get a glucose, you can tell, hey, this is what it is. But as you do a blood test with 100 biomarkers in it, it's very hard to create something complex to be explained simple. And, I'm kind of a pattern analysis person. And what I saw after seeing hundreds and hundreds of people every week in my institute in Ohio was that, and this is years ago, people they just fell into these big buckets of dysfunction. And so the metabolic code takes networks like adrenal, thyroid, pancreas. So, I could go into, your cortisol curve's off and your thyroid receptors aren't firing. But what basically, it's the relationship between cortisol, stress hormone, insulin, which we know controls blood sugar, and thyroid hormone. And what does that mean to the consumer?
Yeah.
It's your energy triad. Or do you feel good through the day, or are you crashing at 3:00? You've gained weight, you feel tired, and if you don't eat, you feel your energy actually drained from you, right? So each of the 5 triads, the other one, gut, immune, brain, how resilient are you, and that relationship between the microbiome and inflammation signaling coming out of the gut, how that influences, anxiety and cognitive function and feeling foggy headed. I call it pushing a thought through jello, right? It's like, so that's another one. But the whole purpose of it was to have a way to score someone, look at all their conventional labs so that any doctor would go, oh, wow, your glucose is off. You have a high C-reactive protein. Oh, wow, your lipids are bad, or your kidney function's low. They can see all that. But what it really does is it says, where is your most important metabolic roadblock that you should fix first? Where should your priority be? And what that allows is for a stepwise approach. Not everybody's a Spartan. I'm a Spartan. If you told me to do 10 things, I'm going to ask you, why didn't you give me 12? I'm going to do every one of them. And I'm going to report back to you with 99.5% that I did everything you asked me to do. Right. But I'm wired that way. Most people aren't wired that way. Instead, we want a stepwise approach to take them on a journey of healing, a journey of performance health if they're not sick, but they just want to be at their best. And through that journey, they're learning about themselves. How should I be eating? Gee, breath work, all that. And, and so what I found is that people really get it right away when they see the report. They're like, oh, wow, I need to work here. I'm in the red or I'm in the yellow. Yep. What does that mean? Yep. And then, gee, I can look at my labs and it does that. And most importantly, where I see the metabolic code, look, I just started, I did this because after doing tens of thousands of patients over the years and teaching at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, you have to have a system that's scoring what's going on. The other piece is, there's, for example, there's any 4 drugs I can pick out that are given all the time. There's no studies on all of them together. Yep. There's no evidence on most of the drug therapies that people were doing for their conditions. It's just isolated, and we hope that the isolated works with all the other drugs that you're given, right? And then that's called polypharmacy, which is a big risk today, right? Everybody's talking about it. So my whole purpose was to say, I want to know everything about how much caffeine you take in, what's your diet like, how do you exercise, how many hours of sleep do you get, do you stress eat and reach for comfort food, are you bloated, are you gassy, all the stuff, right, about lifestyle, symptoms, right? And then I want to know what drug therapies you're on. And then I want to know what nutrients you're taking. And then I want to put a plan together to move the needle of how all that information scored on you, created a metaflammation index. And then did you follow it? And then, most importantly, what was the outcome? So we're creating more of an approach of casting a net that can be assessed and analyzed to say, are we moving the needle for this person's health? And then, of course, we know that we wrote the algorithms to it. So we've got this black box that does all that. And then we'll utilize AI on top of it to just continue to refine the evidence of we're doing things in the right direction, because that's the biggest shortcoming. So where do I see it? Well, I want it used as in many, I want to impact millions of people. I've already impacted thousands. I want to impact millions, and realizing that it's the first step, and that you'll build on those first steps. If you're a clinician, you're going to build on that, but it creates a baseline. Just like I said, I stand on the shoulders of folks. I want people to stand on my shoulders and utilize the code to develop their art and their practice, you know?
Absolutely. I love that it takes something, simplifies it, and you're really looking at incremental growth based off lab work. And then on top of that, it gives, just a normal person step-by-step guide. Hey, let's focus on this. And like you mentioned, for people like us, yeah, we might be able to fix 10 to 20 different things at once, but with the metabolic code, it's all about incremental growth. I think that's what I loved it the most. So
yeah, I appreciate that. And it's how most people can succeed. It's overwhelming if you do too much with people, all at one shot. It just, they end up not adhering, and then they fall off. And what good did you do? Right. Yep. In the end, I'm going to go back to the only thing that matters is that person getting better?
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to be of service to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. LaValle, one of the last things I want to touch on is HRT for both men and women. It's huge. It's something that, we're going to be launching as well. Can you touch on HRT, your thought process around it for both men and women, and the differences between both?
Well, the first thing is what really got into hormones. Dr. Maureen Pelletier, I would say a mentor. She wrote The Idiot's Guide to Menopause. She was my partner both at Good Samaritan Hospital's integrative medicine program. And then we worked together at my LaValle Metabolic Institute. And so I'd sat with a lot of women with her and learned, because she was a very early adopter on bioidentical hormones, right? She's doing bioidentical hormones in the 90s. Nobody's even talking about that, right? And I just saw so many life-changing stories with the application of bioidentical hormones. And of course, now that the black box warning is off bioidentical hormones, or on hormones in general, that's great. I think that we still have to go further on that. Not a huge fan of oral hormones. I think they get metabolized in the liver, but that's the art of compounding. That's the beauty of BHRT. There's a lot of different ways that hormones are given. And for women, it is absolutely essential to their longevity. Once a woman hits menopause, more women will die of heart disease than men. And one of the big reasons is they no longer produce estradiol. And it's because they go from making anti-inflammatory glycans in every cell of their body. As soon as that estradiol goes away, they make pro-inflammatory glycans in every cell of their body. And you give them some estradiol and they switch back. But more importantly, a lot of people don't realize estradiol is essential to mitochondrial health. And your mitochondria are the powerhouses of your cells. So for women, it's incredibly important for their metabolic health to think about bioidentical hormone therapy. Now, everybody has their way of doing it. I would say I'm more on that thing of let's keep it in balance. Let's get you to the dose that's creating physiologic change, but we don't have to lather you with hormones, right? Yeah. Let's try to keep things in range, in balance. You're feeling great, right? And what I found over the years, and working with Dr. Pelletier specifically in women, was that when we managed stress and we got their diet better and we got them on a high fiber diet, like make sure they're taking fibers for their microbiome, you didn't have all these fluctuations and having to change their hormone prescriptions all the time. That it maintained, once you got them set, it was relatively like autopilot for them. And I thought that was big. On men, I think we suffer from a lot of super physiologic dosing of testosterone. I mean, you have men think that their ED is strictly a testosterone problem, when in reality, it's the first sign of heart disease, and they've got vascular issues. And so I'm a huge fan of men because, once again, men with low T will have a much higher all-cause mortality. They are much more at risk, like 88% increased risk of an adverse event going into the hospital for a procedure when their T is low, right? So there's and kidney function's improved in men. Obviously, mood is better, muscles stay intact. All those things that men want. But the bone density, right? Bone density for women on hormones. And look, it's not just estradiol for women. I failed to mention that. It's that balance of progesterone and testosterone. Because women need testosterone too, not as much as men. That's the gender difference, right? Women have 3 primary hormones. Men really have 1. Testosterone drives their behavior. Women are definitely more complex and probably better thinkers and more compassionate. So but I would say that testosterone in men is a huge opportunity. We've never subscribed to that high dose side of testosterone because we think that with that comes, you got to go get a blood draw. Now your hemoglobin's high. Now your hematocrit's high. Gee, you got to go donate blood every 8 weeks. Yeah. Oh, gee, your blood's getting sticky. You might throw a clot. And then there's the other side of driving the estradiol too low in men because men get test. They'll make some estradiol, and you want them to keep some of that estradiol to reduce that risk of sticky blood, right? So I think there's a real art to it. I think compounding definitely creates elegance with testosterone. There's a lot of ways to deliver testosterone. I know we're excited about the some of the tableting technologies that we've been working with, and the preliminary evidence of chewing physiologic levels of testosterone and it literally matching your circadian rhythm. Because I think that's where we got to get to is how do we help people manage that hormone fluctuations during the day that they're supposed to have so that we get them back to being natural. So huge fan of TRT, both for men and women. Not so much a fan of just kind of like the testosterone mill effect where you're just going and you're telemedicine. You answer a survey, you go. 5 minutes later, you're getting a script. You qualify, so that's the part that I think, you want a thoughtful provider in telemedicine, especially when you're dealing with hormones, right? Because once again, these are not supplements. These are very powerful drugs, even though they're identical to what your body makes. You can still have too much of them, or you can have an imbalance in them, and you're not going to get the most out of them that you deserve.
Absolutely. What, on the last few questions, I want to ask you, what is like an ideal age range or even symptoms wise that you recommend for both male and females to look into HRT and testosterone?
Well, I think when you start feeling symptoms, there's men in their 20s that have low T, but the answer for them is not to take testosterone. Most likely they should be using things like enclomiphene or HCG, which basically tell your brain to tell your testicles to start making testosterone. Like it's rebooting the system because stress can cause the lack of gonadotropin releasing hormone. So if you've been under a lot of stress, that could shut down your T, and say, for example, in a man, or estradiol in a woman. And so you want to reboot your body's ability to do that. And what we've always subscribed to, and this is way back from the time of Dr. Pelletier and Dr. Huber in my clinics, is let's get people making their own hormones as long as you can. So there's definitely men in their teens and 20s, if they've had TBIs, they played football, had a lot of head hits. My son doesn't mind sharing this. He was one. He played middle linebacker at Texas Tech. This kid hit his head a lot. And I remembered his first testosterone after he came out of Tech. I was like, oh my gosh, you're 90 years old, bro. I got more tests than you do. But we utilized enclomiphene for him for a period of time. And now he on his own. He's now making testosterone for an age appropriate 26-year-old. So I think it's all about, once again, it's all about that journey. Right. And for women who are on oral contraceptives and then they get off of them, sometimes they sputter at being able to produce their hormones again. And there may be a need to utilize a bioidentical hormone to kind of get them back on track again, get that signaling back. So, I think it's appropriate in this day and age. Like if you asked me that question 30 years ago, I'd have said in their 40s. I honestly, today, 20s. They
Wow.
should look at their hormones. Yeah, because there's so many things. We got all these endocrine disruptors, right? You're drinking plastics and there's 100 million pounds of endocrine disruptors dumped into our environment every year. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's influencing hormones now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a key part to all of this, which is going back to the metabolic code, is the blood work. How if you dive into this stuff, how often do you recommend getting your blood work? And then for the audience, if someone's interested in the metabolic code, what are some steps they can take to really utilize it?
Yeah, so I mean, like, how often you do your blood work? It depends. Like, it just depends if you're doing medication, it may be required that you have to do a partial blood test. You know, it's like somewhere between a whole blood test. I like people doing it. It'd be great if they did it quarterly. Like, just do it 3 times a year. But
Yeah,
twice a year is probably really good. Like a lot of my pro athlete teams, stuff like that. San Jose Sharks do it 3 times a year, for example. Um, um, I would say that other than that, twice a year minimum. If you got to do a yearly, hey, look, I can only afford doing it once a year. Well, good, do it once a year.
yeah,
Get an
for sure.
idea for what you really need at least once a year. Don't put your head in the sand.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, Dr. LaValle, thank you for your time. I'm extremely grateful to be able to do this podcast with someone I not only look up to, but one of the, godfathers of peptides, to say the least. The last question is actually a tradition that we have. What's one question that you have for the next person that we're going to be doing a podcast with? They can be life related, anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, what is the biggest thing that you find you struggle with to help people cross the bridge to taking a personal interest in their health?
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Dr. LaValle. That was absolutely amazing.
Man, it was fun. You got to invite me back. I mean, I was
Yeah,
loving it.
absolutely. Absolutely.